There are sounds that stitch themselves into your memory so tightly that no matter how far you run, how many states you cross, how much therapy you burn through, they remain dormant until something rips them open. For me, it was the ring of my phone at 1:07 a.m. I didn't need to check the screen to know that something had cracked. The sound itself was different. Not my usual chime, but a guttural scream from the past, clawing its way into my clean, quiet life in Chicago. I was halfway through a mug of chamomile tea, curled under my favorite knitted throw, when the call came. The name on the screen made my stomach churn. Claire. My sister. The same Claire who hadn't spoken to me in nearly 3 years unless it was to guilt me about something or to send passive-aggressive holiday greetings loaded with subtext and pity. She never called. Not unless she wanted something. I hesitated. Just long enough for the second ring. Then I answered, because I'm still me, still the eldest, still the fixer, still the daughter who gets things done when no one else will. Her voice exploded through the line before I could even say hello. Breathless. Panicked. Practiced. "It's Dad," she gasped, like she'd been running. "He's having a heart attack. They're saying it's bad. The doctor's not sure he's going to make it. The world didn't stop." That's a lie they tell you in books and movies. The world doesn't stop when trauma comes back. It spins faster, shoving everything out of alignment. I didn't even feel the floor under my feet as I moved, grabbing keys, slipping shoes on over bare feet, stuffing my laptop and charger into a worn canvas bag. My suitcase was still dusty from the last time I'd made that trip back home, a funeral for an uncle I barely knew, where I stood beside my mother and played the obedient daughter while my stomach twisted with old injuries. Chicago to Salem, Oregon. It's not just a trip. It's a pilgrimage through grief, memory, and the kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep ever cures. On the plane, I replayed every last word of that call, searching for sincerity in her voice. But that was the thing about Claire, she knew how to dress lies up in real clothes. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe my father, cold and sharp as he was genuinely at death's door. I wanted that to be the reason she was calling me, not because I had the one thing they all lacked: stability. I walked into the hospital lobby just after 9 p.m., 18 hours and 2 layovers later. The place was sterile and humming. The lighting was dim, but the walls were painted that same lifeless beige every hospital seemed to agree on, and the air smelled like bleach and fear. At the reception desk, a tired-looking nurse scanned her monitor, then looked at me like I'd just asked for directions to a dream. "Mark Allen? He was discharged this morning," she said. I blinked. "What?" "He's not here. He went home around 11 a.m. You're listed as family, right? Someone should have told you." I stood there, silence pouring into the space between us. My chest buzzed with the beginnings of something ugly. "Thanks," I muttered, before turning around, the hospital walls narrowing around me like I'd just walked into a trap I should have recognized the shape of from miles away. By the time I pulled up in front of the house, my childhood home, the one with the 2 perfect lavender bushes and the porched swing that only ever squeaked when I sat in it, I was shaking. Something was off. There were no signs of urgency. No visible chaos. Just the front light on, like it was any other night. Claire opened the door before I could knock. Her smile was too rehearsed. Like she'd practiced it in the mirror, like she knew what she was about to do would require a mask. "He's home," she said, like this was a game of tag and I was late to the backyard. "Stable. Everything's fine now. Come in." I stepped inside. The air wasn't heavy with recovery or fear. It was just regular, almost smug. Then I saw the living room. The coffee table was covered in papers. Not magazines or hospital discharge notes. Legal documents. Stacks of them. Financial binders, envelopes with estate logos. A pen still uncapped beside a yellow legal pad where someone had scribbled figures. In the corner, my brother Jason sat cross-legged on the floor, calculator in hand, biting his lip the way he did when he was trying to look deep in thought. Mom sat on the edge of the couch, flipping through a folder like she was auditioning for a commercial about trust funds. And Dad, the man who was supposedly too close to death to speak, was reclining in his chair with a throw blanket over his legs, sipping water like he had just returned from a leisurely walk. "You look tired," Mom said, without looking up. "I was told Dad was dying," I said, my voice a little too loud for the quiet in that room. Claire stepped forward, her voice syrupy. "We didn't know how else to get you to come." That sentence hit me like a slap. But it wasn't the worst part. "The thing is," she added, glancing nervously at Dad, "he wants to talk about the estate. About money. While he's still with us, you know. Before it's too late." I stared at them. All of them. My family arranged like actors in a play I had no script for. Vultures pretending to be mourners, until you looked close enough to see the feathers sticking out of their pockets. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part of me wanted to laugh loud, hysterical, the kind that rattles bones. But mostly I felt nothing. Just this eerie, familiar numbness. The same kind I felt when I lost my bedroom to Claire at age 12 because she needed space for her study corner. The same numbness that wrapped around me like a fog when I saw my college rejection letter waved off while Claire's summer abroad photos were plastered on the fridge like National Geographic spreads. And now here we were. Me, the estranged, inconvenient daughter, the one who had clawed her way out of emotional manipulation and years of being the family scapegoat, standing in the same damn living room, still being baited and used like a chess piece. Only this time, I wasn't 12. I wasn't desperate for approval. This time, I came with my own pen. They didn't even let me sit down before they brought the documents out. No hello. No how was your flight. No, I'm sorry we lied about a life-or-death emergency to drag you across the country like some gullible idiot who still believes in the myth of family. Instead, Jason crossed the room with a manila envelope that bulged at the sides, the kind of envelope that doesn't just carry paper, but legacy, leverage, and the slow rot of betrayal that had been festering in this house for years. "We thought it'd be better if you saw it tonight," he said, like he was offering me dessert after a long meal. I looked at him, then at Claire, who couldn't even meet my eyes. And finally at Dad, who was pretending to be tired, reclining deeper into his seat, half-lidded like a man who might nod off at any second. But the glint in his eyes, the one that always gave away his calculation, was sharp. Too sharp. The kind of sharp that slices without needing to move. I took the envelope. I didn't say anything as I opened it. My fingers felt clumsy, but my brain was moving fast, faster than it had in months. On top was a cover letter typed in clean, expensive font. I recognized the firm. They were the ones who handled Dad's first business acquisition, the deal he closed a year after Mom died. The deal I stayed up 3 nights helping him finalize, drafting paperwork, organizing signatures, sorting tax records, because he couldn't remember where he'd filed anything after losing the only person who ever really balanced him. I flipped the cover page and there it was. Bold at the top. Revocation and Restatement of Living Trust Agreement, Mark Allen. The next page. General Durable Power of Attorney. Then, Transfer of Property, Deed Draft. Beneficiary Designations. Advance Healthcare Directive. And right below that, in faded legalese, my name, not listed as a successor trustee. Not even as a contingent beneficiary, but as a signatory to confirm I agreed to this new arrangement. Jason pointed to a highlighted line like he was explaining directions to a lost tourist. It's just a trust renewal. Just a formality. Dad's consolidating everything under one plan. Claire and I will manage things while he recovers. I stared at the documents, then at my father. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the TV, muted in the background, showing a cooking show where someone was flambeing something with dramatic fire. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Recovering," I said, voice low. "You told me he was having a heart attack." Claire stepped in now, her tone falsely soothing, coated in honey and arsenic. "He was in distress. His blood pressure spiked. The doctors said it was a warning sign. He could go at any time. We didn't want you to miss the chance to help set things right. Set things right. I had to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because if I didn't let out the bitterness that way, it was going to explode through the walls of my throat. I flipped another page, and there it was. The transfer. The house. The lake cabin. The 3 rental properties we'd flipped together. My name had once been on those deeds, not out of generosity, but because I'd co-invested. I was the one who stayed behind after Mom passed. I was the one who cleaned the mold out of the cabin bathroom while Dad refused to hire professionals. I was the one who painted walls until my hands blistered because we couldn't afford outside labor. I was the one who held his shaking hand when the grief wouldn't let him breathe. I was the one who built it with him. And now, with one signature, I would be erasing myself from every corner of what we created. It's just paperwork, Jason said again, too quickly. Just reaffirming the new arrangement. It's still all in the family. Funny how in the family suddenly stopped including me. I closed the folder slowly, my hands steady now, because if I let myself shake, even a little, I wouldn't stop. You're transferring everything into a new trust, I said, voice flat. And in this version, I get nothing unless you two feel generous enough to include me. Jason blinked. Claire stepped back slightly, like I'd slapped her with a word. Dad cleared his throat. She's twisting it, Claire said. It's about protecting the assets. Keeping things simple. Simple. Sure. Simple like a knife between ribs. I took a long breath, letting the silence hang just long enough for them to feel it. Then I walked over to the dining table and sat down. The envelope in my lap like a loaded gun. Claire followed with a pen, already uncapped, already extended toward me like I was just here to sign a delivery. Dad's been clear about what he wants, she said. We're just following his wishes. I looked at the pen. It was blue. Cheap. The kind you grab from a hotel desk drawer. I reached for it with my right hand. But something in me, something buried for years under layers of people-pleasing and guilt and the quiet grief of being forgotten, started to burn. It wasn't anger. Anger would have been clean. This was a colder thing. A click. A turning of gears. A final settling of truth. Because they weren't doing this out of love for our father. They were doing it because they were afraid. Afraid that the man who built everything might die with guilt in his chest. Guilt over the daughter he had once leaned on like oxygen and leave it all to her. To me. That's what this was. This wasn't legacy planning. This wasn't end-of-life care. This was a heist, staged by family. I held the pen. My fingers curled around it slowly. I could feel their eyes on me, buzzing with anticipation, vibrating with relief that their biggest obstacle, me, had finally come to heal. And so I smiled. I smiled the same way I used to when they praised Claire's achievements in front of me, pretending I didn't notice. I smiled the same way I did when Jason forgot my birthday 3 years in a row but still expected me to show up to his baby shower with gifts for his twins. I smiled like someone who had swallowed disappointment enough times to learn the taste of poison without flinching. I uncapped the pen. They didn't notice the way my thumb slid down to the cartridge. They didn't notice the silent, practiced flick I gave it under the table, the motion I learned from 10 years of working in office administration, where I'd fixed more pens than I could count. The ink cartridge dislodged just slightly. Enough to break the flow. Enough to leave the tip dry. I leaned forward. Page by page, I signed with the silent pen. Their relief was palpable. Jason exhaled like he'd just avoided a lawsuit. Claire clapped her hands together, a performative little flutter, like she was at a christening. I knew you'd do the right thing, she whispered. I handed the documents back. They took them like they were sacred scrolls. Can I get a copy for my records? I asked sweetly. Jason's eyes flicked to Claire. She hesitated, then smiled. Of course. We'll send it by email. Tomorrow. Perfect, I said. I'll look out for it. I stood up, brushed imaginary lint off my jacket, and looked at each of them, one by one, with the kind of calm that scares people more than rage ever could. Then I walked upstairs to the old guest room and shut the door behind me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened my laptop and began typing. To Evelyn Mahoney, J.D., Estate Attorney. Subject: Fraudulent Trust Modification. Urgent consultation needed. And then I laid it all out. The forged emotional manipulation. The trickery. The attempt to coerce under false pretenses. Every legal document I'd ever been part of that proved my stake in the properties. The investments. The shared accounts. The emails. The voice recordings I'd saved over the years when things didn't feel right. Because I knew this was coming. I knew that one day my family, the same people who had discarded me emotionally, would come for what I helped build. And they thought I would just hand it over. Because I'm quiet. Because I'm polite. Because I don't like conflict. But what they forgot is that quiet doesn't mean weak. Polite doesn't mean blind. And just because I don't fight their way doesn't mean I won't fight. The next morning, Jason texted me at 7:12 a.m. Hey, can you confirm you signed last night? The scanner didn't pick anything up. Might be a glitch. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I typed back. Yeah, must be a glitch. Try harder. I never told them I'd used a dead pen. Never told them I'd recorded the conversation. Never told them I'd already spoken to a lawyer and begun the process of freezing the assets until the matter was reviewed. They'll find out soon enough. Because this time, I'm not leaving quietly. I'm not walking away with nothing while they rewrite history. There is a particular kind of silence that doesn't just stretch across a room, but coils around the people inside it, wrapping their lungs, choking their thoughts, dragging every bit of noise down into its own grave. That was the silence that fell after I dropped the final stack of papers onto the mahogany dining table, the one my father used to polish himself every Sunday like it was an altar instead of furniture. I watched their eyes, their beautifully rehearsed faces, start to melt in real time, their lips twitching, their shoulders locked, trying to hold the shape of control while every thread of their plan unraveled with precision. Jason, still in the same smug navy sweater he wore last night, leaned forward as if the proximity might somehow distort reality. Claire stood behind him, arms folded tight over her chest, knuckles pale against her forearms, like maybe if she held herself tightly enough, the walls wouldn't come crashing down. You might want to take a closer look at your paperwork, I said, voice calm, measured, with just the faintest edge of triumph tucked beneath the syllables. Then, with an exhale I had been holding for what felt like a lifetime, I reached into my coat pocket, the same coat they mocked as corporate armor back when I first moved out and started my company. I pulled out the thick folder, crisp and precise, and laid it on the table. No fanfare. No explanation. Just fact. They didn't move at first. They stared. Waiting, maybe, for me to say I was bluffing. For me to admit I was bluffing. I wasn't. This, I said, tapping the top page gently, was filed 3 days ago with the state of Illinois, notarized, witnessed, and fully compliant under federal statute. Jason's fingers twitched toward it, then retracted. I pulled out the top document and handed it directly to Claire, because I wanted her to be the first to see it. The first to feel the cracks in her perfect little reality spider across the surface, like pressure on glass. I've transferred full ownership of all my business shares, every asset, every dollar of equity, every future return, into a charitable trust, I said, letting the words hang like smoke. It's irrevocable, inviolable, legally protected. She blinked, lips parting in the tiniest involuntary gasp. Which means, I continued, my tone soft but lethal, not one penny of my company can be accessed, claimed, or distributed through any estate maneuvering. It is entirely outside the reach of this family. I paused. Let it sink in. Forever. Claire made a noise, something between a laugh and a scoff, but it was hollow. Wounded. Jason grabbed the paper now, scanning it like he could will the truth to rewrite itself. You gave away everything, he hissed, voice strained. To a charity with your name on it? Why? Why the hell would you? Oh no, I cut him off, with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Not just with my name on it. I am the trustee. I built the structure. I drafted the mission. It supports women recovering from financial abuse, overlooked daughters, disinherited children. It's poetic, really. They were still trying to digest that when I dropped the second blow. And as for Dad, I said, reaching for the next folder from my bag, this one sealed with a blue ribbon because I like details, I filed for financial guardianship 6 weeks ago. Jason's head snapped up. Claire's eyes widened. I laid the document gently on the table, flipped it open to the signature page, and tapped it once. Signed by Dad. Witnessed by his doctor. Notarized by a third party. Reviewed by the court. Effective immediately. Jason's voice was barely a whisper now. That's not possible. You're lying. I stepped back, crossing my arms. Try me. Claire lunged forward and snatched the document, eyes darting across the legalese, disbelief shifting slowly into comprehension. The paper didn't lie. It had the courthouse seal. It had the date. It had his signature. It was done. I watched it all play out, the collapse of their smug certainty, the erosion of every assumption they had brought to this house. They had called me in with a fake emergency. They had dangled love like bait. They had tried to use grief and guilt as currency. And they thought I had nothing but tears and regrets to offer in return. What they didn't realize was that I'd been building this moment for years. I wasn't just the daughter they discarded. I was the one who watched, who learned, who remembered. I knew exactly who they were, and more importantly, I knew exactly who I had become. They were still frozen in place when I heard footsteps behind me. Not rushed, not panicked. Just slow, deliberate steps on the tile floor. The sound of a man who no longer cared to play along. Dad stood in the doorway. The light from the morning sun was spilling through the windows now, and it landed on him just right, casting his face in clear, sharp lines. No more shadows. No more reclining like an invalid. He looked older, yes, but also awake. Present in a way he hadn't been in years. Jason was the first to speak, his voice cracking like the ice under him. Dad, do you see what she's done? She's trying to. Dad held up a hand. Just one quiet gesture. Jason shut his mouth instantly. I knew, Dad said, his voice low but cutting through the room like a sword, which of you would come running because of love, and which of you would come running because of money. He stepped closer, glancing at the mess of documents on the table. His eyes found mine. I signed that guardianship without hesitation, he said, because I knew who I could trust. Claire's breath caught audibly. Dad turned to her now, and I watched something shift in her, watched years of assumed favor twist into something brittle. When your mother died, he continued, it wasn't you or Jason who stayed. It was her. Stephanie. The sound of my name, spoken aloud in that house, felt like thunder. She buried your mother, Dad said, voice growing stronger with every word. She paid the bills when I forgot how. She cooked meals I didn't eat. She handled the business accounts when I couldn't see past the grief. He walked forward now, past me, toward the fireplace. She never asked for anything. Not praise. Not ownership. Not even a thank you. Then he turned back to them. And you thought she'd show up here with nothing but a suitcase and a bleeding heart, and that you'd take everything. Claire stepped back. Jason had stopped pretending to read the document. Dad looked down at the table, then reached for the folder containing the trust documents, flipping it open. She's protecting everything, he said. Not just from you, but from me. Because she knows what I let this family become. His voice broke on that last word. And for a moment, the silence wasn't choking anymore. It was cleansing. Like something had been cracked wide open and finally, let the truth breathe. No one spoke. Because there was nothing left to say. The empire they thought they were inheriting? Already dismantled. The daughter they thought they could manipulate? Already 5 steps ahead. And the father they assumed would back them blindly? Standing in judgment, eyes wide open. Finally, Jason sat down heavily, as if the weight of it all had just slammed into him. Claire looked at me with a kind of dazed horror, like she'd finally seen the version of me that existed outside her narrative, the version that wasn't broken or desperate to be seen. "I'll be in touch," I said, grabbing my bag. Neither of them stopped me. Not this time. There is a moment, one you never forget, when the balance of power doesn't just shift, it topples with a finality so absolute you can hear the silence it leaves behind. A silence not born of peace, but of exposure. Of truth slicing clean through illusion. Of the masks falling from faces that never knew how to wear anything but performance. It happened right there, in that once familiar room, beneath the light of the morning sun pouring in through the front bay window, the same window I used to sit in front of with my knees pulled to my chest, watching raindrops race each other down the glass while the rest of the family buzzed around Claire's latest triumph like moths to a flame. Now the same sunlight illuminated a battlefield. Not of blood, but of betrayal. Not of violence, but of veiled cruelty finally laid bare. Jason stood first. His hands curled into fists that trembled not from courage, but from the unraveling of the future he had drawn in his mind with the certainty of a thief already counting stolen gold. His voice rose, desperate and wild, not because he believed in his innocence, but because losing this game meant admitting he never knew how to play without cheating. "This is insanity," he snapped, eyes wide and wild, pacing the floor like a predator whose prey had vanished. "You think you're better than us because you kept secrets and signed papers behind everyone's backs? You think you're noble? This is betrayal. This is." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just stared at him the way a courtroom stares at a liar caught mid-oath. "This was never about being better," I said, voice low but strong enough to cut through the chaos he was trying to reignite. "It was about not letting you turn Dad's legacy into your playground." "You had no right," he began, but Claire interrupted now, her voice strained, the composure she wore like designer perfume finally cracking beneath the weight of being exposed. "We're family," she said sharply, pointing at the papers, the signatures, the judgment that now surrounded her like a noose. "You don't do this to family. You don't blindside us, humiliate us." I turned to face her fully now. "No," I said. "You don't fake a heart attack to lure your sister across the country. You don't lie about Dad's health, then have legal documents waiting before she even sets down her suitcase." I took a step closer, but not with aggression. With precision. Like a chess player lifting her final piece. "You don't rewrite history and expect me to co-sign the erasure of every sacrifice I made. That's not family, Claire. That's opportunism dressed in pearls." Then the youngest voice broke through. Soft. Shaken. The words laced with something that hadn't touched the room all morning, guilt. "Why didn't you tell us?" The question came from Melissa, the baby of the family, the one always standing just outside the ring, close enough to clap when told but never quite trusted with the wheel. She looked at me now with wet eyes, not with defiance, but with a fragile longing. Not for money. Not for power. But maybe, finally, for the truth. I met her gaze and answered without apology, "Because you wouldn't have listened. None of you would have listened. You never saw Dad as a person. You saw him as a vault with a heartbeat. A wallet that owed you his life because you shared his name." I saw it then, the recoil. The sting. The dawning recognition of how deep they had dug into their own illusion. And how much of what they thought was owed to them had never belonged to them at all. Jason's face collapsed into himself, his fury giving way to something quieter, something darker, shame. Claire turned away, her shoulders trembling with a rage she didn't know how to weaponize anymore. The tools she always used, charm, guilt, manipulation, lay shattered at her feet. And I didn't feel victorious. Because this wasn't about victory. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't even angry anymore. That stage had long since burned away like fog under morning light. I just stood. Not elevated. Not above them. Just grounded. And powerful. Not because I stole anything, but because I protected what they tried to take. Because I earned it. Because I refused to fold when the table was rigged and the deck stacked with ghosts and grudges. Because the hardest thing I ever did was stop waiting to be loved the way I deserved and start loving myself in the way they never could. Then I turned to the only person in the room who had seen me through all the smoke and mirrors. My father. He looked tired, not from age, but from finally letting go of the weight he had carried for decades, the guilt of raising a family fractured by favoritism, blind to the daughter who had once been his shadow through storms. He raised his eyes to mine. They weren't proud. They weren't even grateful. They were honest. "Let's go," I said softly. "Let's go home." He nodded once, slowly rising to his feet with the help of his cane, the one he refused to use around Jason and Claire because pride had always been his armor. But with me, he didn't need it. He let himself be seen. And so we walked. Past the living room. Past the hallway with the photos that had never included me. Past the judgment and the greed and the desperate, clinging to a legacy none of them helped build. And as we stepped out into the morning light, I heard nothing behind us. No arguments. No last-minute protests. No sudden apologies. Just silence. The silence of truth. They stood there, still frozen in place, not just defeated, but exposed. Not just quiet, but unraveled. Their plan hadn't just failed. It had backfired. Their desire to control me, to reduce me to a scared girl signing away her worth, had crumbled in front of the very man they tried to manipulate. They didn't just lose a power struggle. They lost the narrative. Because I hadn't just survived their trap. I had rewritten the rules. The house shrank behind us as I helped Dad into the passenger seat of my car. He looked straight ahead, eyes lost in thought, then turned to me with a voice I hadn't heard in years, steady, undemanding, and clear. "Stephanie," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't stop them sooner." I started the car and pulled away from the house that once felt like a wound I couldn't escape. "I stopped waiting for you to," I said, watching the road ahead. "But I'm glad you finally did." The wind moved through the trees, gentle now, and the silence between us was no longer painful. It was peace. Earned, not given. We didn't speak for a long time after that. We didn't need to, because the past had been closed like a book with its final page signed, sealed, and rewritten by the one they thought would never fight back. And as the sun rose higher and the road unfolded in front of me like a path only I could walk, I realized something deeper than revenge. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is show them who you became after they stopped looking. Because when they wrote me off, they assumed I'd stay erased. But I didn't just return. I came back with ink. They faked a heart attack to rob me, so I faked a signature and took everything back. Subscribe for more stories where silence becomes strategy and power changes hands.